We will walk past the residence of the Queen Margrethe II of Denmark. Welcome to 60-minute tour of Copenhagen. Calculated time for the tour is by walking 1 hour 13 minutes and by bicycle 30 minutes. Now write in the Google Maps The Little Mermaid and head towards the famous landmark. The Little Mermaid in Danish Den Lillehavfru is a bronze statue by Edvard Eriksson depicting a mermaid becoming human. It is 125 meters or 4.1 feet tall and weighs 175 kilograms or 385 pounds, based on the 1837 fairy tale of the same name by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. The small and unimposing statue is a Copenhagen icon and has been a major tourist attraction since its unveiling in 1913. The statue was commissioned in 1909 by Carl Jacobsen, son of the founder of Carlsberg, who had asked the ballerina Ellen Price to model for the statue. The sculptor Edvard Eriksson created the bronze statue, which was unveiled on 23rd of August 1913. The statue's head was modeled after Price, but as the ballerina did not agree to model in the nude, the sculptor's wife, Elaine Eriksson, was used for the body. The Copenhagen City Council arranged to move the statue to Shanghai at the Danish Pavilion for the duration of the Expo 2010, the first time it had been moved officially from its perch. Now write in the Google Maps Kastellet and walk towards the Copenhagen Citadel. Kastellet, in Danish translated the citadel, it is one of the best preserved fortresses in Northern Europe. It is constructed in the form of a pentagon with bastions at its corners. Kastellet was continuous with the Ring of Bastion ramparts, which used to encircle Copenhagen, but of which only the ramparts of Christianshavn remain today. A number of buildings are located within the grounds of Kastellet, including the Citadel Church as well as a windmill. The area houses various military activities, but it mainly serves as a public park and a historic site. The King Christian IV of Denmark initiated Kastellet's construction in 1626 with the building of an advanced post, St. Anne's Redoubt, on the coast north of the city. The redoubt guarded the entrance to the port, together with a blockhouse that was constructed north of Christianshavn, which had just been founded on the other side of the strait between Zealand and Amager. At that time, the fortifications only reached as far north as present-day Nørreport Station, and then returned southeast to meet the coast at Bremerholm, the royal shipyard. However, part of the king's plan was to expand the area of the fortified city by abandoning the old east rampart and instead extend the rampart straight north to connect it to St. Anne's Redoubt. This plan was not completed until the mid-1640s, shortly after the king Frederick III succeeded the King Christian IV. After the Swedish siege of Copenhagen from 1658 to 1660, the Dutch engineer Henrik Roos was called in to help rebuild and extend the construction. The fortification was named the Citadel Frederikshavn, but it is better known as Kastellet, the Citadel. The Kastellet was part of the defense of Copenhagen against the United Kingdom in the Battle of Copenhagen 1807. But during the German invasion of Denmark on 9th of April 1940, German troops landing at the nearby harbor captured the citadel without resistance. The citadel has two gates, King's Gate on the south side facing the city and Norway Gate on the north side of the citadel, which both date from 1663 as part of Roos's original citadel. They are built in the Dutch Baroque style and are on their interior side flanked by guardhouses. The King's Gate is decorated with garlands and pilasters and a bust of the King Frederick III. Norway Gate used to face open countryside outside the city, and has therefore been built to a more simple design. The caponniers of this gate were demolished in the late 19th century. Heavy bastions are named as follows: the King's Bastion, the Queen's Bastion, the Count's Bastion, the Princess's Bastion, and the Prince's Bastion. The blacksmith's line in Danish Smedelinjen is a system of outworks separating the inner and the outer moat located to the south and southwest towards the city. It consisted of 4 ravelins and 3 counterguard interconnected by long, low earthworks. The Swine's Ravelin, one of the Ostopernemus forges, has been preserved and is now used by the park authorities. Another forge was built on Falster's counterguard in 1709, rebuilt in 1888. It now serves as residence of military employees. When the Free Port of Copenhagen was constructed, the northern portion of the blacksmith's line was dug away. but the remaining part was put at the disposal of the city of Copenhagen in 1918 and now serves as parkland. The commander's house was built in 1725 in the Baroque style by architect and master builder Elias Hauser, who also designed the first Christiansborg Palace, which burned in 1794. Built in yellow dressed masonry with white detailing, it consists of 2 floors under a red tile roof. The triangular pediment is decorated with a relief and Christian Sevenths monogram undertopped by a crown. It served as the official residence of the Chief of Defense until 2008. The rows are 6 two-story terraces, which were originally built by Henrik Roos as barracks for the soldiers based at the Citadel. The dorms measured 4 by 4 meters and contained 2 triple beds, a small table, and 2 benches. Now the rows have individual names. General stock, where the commanders resided until the commander's house was built. Artillery stock for the artillerists, and star stock, elephant stock, swan stock, and fortuna stock. The powder house at the Queen's Bastion, which was used for the storage of black powder, is the only surviving of originally 2 identical powder houses, which were built by D'Amico Pelli in 1712. The other one was located at the Count's Bastion. It was designed with massive walls and a slightly vaulted ceiling to ensure that a possible explosion would move upward and thereby cause a minimum of damages to the surroundings. When in 1779, the powder house at the East Rampart exploded, causing damages in the New Border area and all the way to Bredgade, it was decided that it was too dangerous to store explosives at the ramparts, and the powder houses at the Citadel instead came into use as jails. Citadel Church was built in 1703 in heavy Baroque style during the reign of the King Frederick IV. A prison complex was built on the rear side of the church in 1725, with eye holes in the wall between the church and the prison cells, which enable prisoners to follow church services. The English explorer and pirate John Norcross was the person to be imprisoned at Castellet for the most extensive period. He spent 32 years in the prison at Castellet, 16 of those years in a wooden cage. On the King's Bastion, in the southwestern corner of Castellet, stands a windmill. Built in 1847, it replaced another mill from 1718, which was destroyed by a storm the year before. The original mill was a post mill, while the current mill is of the Dutch type. Since a fortified city needed secure supplies, including supplies of flour and rolled groats in the event of siege, numerous windmills were constructed on the bastions. In 1800, a total of 16 windmills were found on the ramparts of Copenhagen. The mill at Castellet is the last which is still working, while another one, L'Elmol at the Christians Haven Rampart, was transformed into a private home in 1915 and now survives as a historic house museum. The Central Guardhouse is located just inside the King's Gate, and it was built from 1873 to 1874 with an attached jailhouse. The architect is unknown. It replaced the Central Guardhouse at Kongens Nytorv, where the Central Guard had been stationed since 1724. Nowadays, the Citadel is still an active military area that belongs to the Ministry of Defense. Military activity in the area includes use by the Home Guard, Defense Intelligence Service, the Judge Advocate Corps, and the Royal Garrison Library. After Castellet, you can see a memorial of soldier bowing its head. This is Vor Faldier in English, are fallen. It is a 6-meter bronze memorial monument by Smol Linhart, free, which was paid for by nationwide public subscription and erected in memory of those Danes who gave their lives as volunteers in the service of the Allies of World War II. We have entered Churchill Park. Churchill Parken is a public park occupying tract of land between Castellet and the street Esplanadin, located on the former Esplanade, which used to surround Castellet. The area has a long history as a green space but received its current name in 1965 to commemorate Winston Churchill and the British assistance in the liberation of Denmark during World War II. St. Albans Church, the Anglican Church, and the Museum of Danish Resistance are located within the boundaries of the park. In the park, you can find Winston Churchill bronze bust statue done in 1955 by Oscar Niemann. Now, write in the Google Maps Geffion Fountain and walk towards St. Albans Church. St. Albans Church is locally often referred to simply as the English Church. is an Anglican church. It was built from 1885 to 1887 for the benefit of the growing English congregation in the city, designed by Arthur Blomefield as a traditional English parish church in the Gothic Revival style. It is in a peaceful park setting at the end of a melee gate in the northern part of the city center. Through the 19th century, the English community in Copenhagen grew as the city's significance as a center of commerce increased. The congregation had ambitions to build their own church, and a church building committee was established in 1854, but remained unable to find the means needed for the project. In 1864, it made an appeal to the then Prince of Wales, and his consort, the Danish-born Princess Alexandra, took it upon her to assist. She managed to raise funds as well as provide a very attractive site for its construction when she persuaded the Danish Ministry of War to grant permission to have the church built on the esplanade outside the Citadel Castellet. The foundation stone of St. Alban's Church was laid on 19th of September 1885. It was consecrated 2 years later on 17th of September 1887. The Gayfion Fountain in Danish Gayfion Springvandet in Nordre Toldbad i Pictures, a large-scale group of oxen pulling a plow and being driven by the Norse goddess Gayfjon. The fountain was donated to the city of Copenhagen by the Carlsberg Foundation on the brewery's 50-year anniversary. It was originally supposed to be in the main town square outside City Hall, but it was decided instead to build it near the Oresund in its current location. It was designed by Danish artist Anders Bundegaard, who sculpted the naturalistic figures from 1897 to 1899. The basins and decorations were completed in 1908. The fountain was first activated on 14th of July 1908. The fountain shows a story of mythical creation of the island of Zealand on which Copenhagen is located. The legend appears in Ragnar's Drapa, a 9th century skaldic poem recorded in the 13th century Prose Edda, and in Ynglinga Saga as recorded in E.S. Snorre Sturluson's 13th century Heimskringla book. Ynglinga Saga tells a story of the Swedish king Gelfi who promised Gayfjon the territory she could plow in a night. She turned her 4 sons into oxen, and the territory they plowed out of the earth was then thrown into the Danish Sea between Scania and the island of Fyen. Hira, the whole became a lake called Lagren and Laginium. Right in the Google Maps, Amalienborg, and walk back to Esplanaden towards the Museum of Danish Resistance. The nearby museum tells the story of Danish resistance during Nazi occupation from 1940 to 1945. It springs from an exhibition called Fighting Denmark, arranged by the Resistance Council in the summer of 1945. In 1957, a permanent museum was opened on the present location, though you need to buy a ticket to enter the museum. Amalienborg is the official residence for the Danish royal family. The Frederiksstaden district was built on the former grounds of 2 other palaces. The first palace was called Sophie Amalienborg. It was built by Queen Sophie Amalie, consort to Frederick III, on part of the land which her father-in-law Christian IV had acquired outside of Copenhagen's old walled city. Now known as the Eandræby district, in the early 17th century when he had been king, other parts of the land were used for Rosenborg Castle in Nyborg and the new eastern fortified wall around the old city. The king died in 1670, and the Queen Dowager lived there until her death on 20th of February 1685. 4 years later, on 15th of April 1689, Sophie Amalie's son king, Christian V celebrated his 44th birthday at the palace with the presentation of a German opera, perhaps the first opera presentation in Denmark, in a specially built temporary theater. The presentation was a great success, and it was repeated a few days later on 19th of April. However, immediately after the start of the second performance, a stage decoration caught fire, causing the theater and the palace to burn to the ground, and about 180 people died that day. The second Amalienborg was built by Frederick IV at the beginning of his reign. The second Amalienborg consisted of a summer house, a central pavilion, and arcades on both sides of the pavilion. Near one side of the buildings was a French-style garden, and on the other side were military drill grounds. The pavilion had a dining room on the ground floor. On the upper floor was a salon with a view out to the harbor, the garden, and the drill grounds. Amalienborg is the centerpiece of Frederiksstaden, a district that was launched by King Frederick V to commemorate in 1748 the tercentenary of the Oldenburg family's ascent to the throne of Denmark, and in 1749 the tercenary of the coronation of Christian I of Denmark. This development is generally thought to have been the brainchild of Danish ambassador plenipotentiary in Paris, Johan Hartwig Ernest Bernström. Heading the project was Lord High Steward Adam Gottlob Modikewiu, one of the most powerful and influential men in the country, with Nicolai Adidid as royal architect and supervisor. The project consisted of 4 identical mansions, built to house 4 distinguished families of nobility from the royal circles, placed around an octagonal square. These mansions form the modern Palace of Amalienborg. According to ADD had Katie these master plans for Frederiksstad and the Amalienborg palaces. The 4 palaces surrounding the plaza were conceived of as town mansions for the families of chosen nobility. Their exteriors were identical, but interiors differed. First, the site on which the aristocrats could build was given to them free of charge, and they were further exempted from taxes and duties. The building of the palaces on the western side of the square started in 1750. When David died in 1754, the 2 western palaces had been completed. The work on the other palaces was continued by David's colleague and rival Laurits de Thurah, strictly according to David's plans. The palaces were completed in 1760 when the royal family found themselves homeless after the Christiansborg Palace fire on 26th of February 1794. The noblemen who owned them were willing to part with their mansions for promotion and money, and the Moltke palaces were acquired in a few days. The 4 palaces are Christian VII's Palace, originally known as Moltke's Palace, Christian VIII's Palace, originally known as Lewitzau's Palace, Frederick VIII's Palace, originally known as Brockdorf's Palace, Pierre and Christian IX's Palace, originally known as Schick's Palace. Christian VII's Palace is also known as Moltke's Palace and was originally built for Lord High Steward Anne Gottlob Moltke. It is the southwestern palace and has been since 1885 used to accommodate and entertain prominent guests for receptions and for ceremonial purposes. Moltke's Palace was erected in 1750 to 1754 by the best craftsmen and artists of their day. It was the most expensive of the 4 palaces at the time it was built and had the most extravagant interiors. The Great Hall featured wood carvings by Louis-Auguste Leclerc, paintings by François Bouchide, and stucco by Giovanni Battista Fossati, and is acknowledged widely as perhaps the finest Danish Rococo interior. Immediately after the Christiansborg Palace fire in 1794 and 2 years after the death of the original owner, the royal family, headed by the king Christian VII, purchased the first of the 4 palaces to be sold to the royal family. He commissioned Caspar Friedrich Harsdorff to turn it into a royal residence. They occupied the new residence in December 1794. King Frederick VI used the palace for his royal household. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs used parts of the palace from 1852 to 1885. For short periods of time in the intervening years, the palace has housed various members of the royal family, while restoration took place on their respective palaces. After 200 years, the facade, decorated by German sculptor Johann Christoph Petzold, was severely damaged, causing parts of Amalienborg Place to be closed to prevent injury. In 1982, exterior and interior restoration began, that completed in early 1996. Christian VIII's Palace, also known as Lewitzau's Palace, is the northwestern palace and was originally built for Privy Councillor Count Christian Frederick Lewitzau, and between 1750 and 1760. Queen Margrethe, the second's grandson Prince Felix, currently lives in an apartment in the palace. Prince Joachim and Princess Marie, who reside permanently in France, have also had an apartment made available to them in the palace when they perform engagements in Denmark. The palace was sold by the entailed estate of Restrup, which had been established in 1756 by Lewitzau, the late owner. The family set one condition when they sold the building, that the Count's coat of arms should never be removed from the building. It can still be seen beside that of the monarchs. The king's half-brother Frederick bought the palace in 1794, and painter and architect Nicolas Abel-Gard modernized the interiors in the new French Empire style. The palace was named Christian VIII's Palace after his son Christian Frederick, who grew up in the palace, took over the building in 1805 upon the death of his father, and would become king in 1839. From 1885, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs used parts of the palace, but moved out 1898 when the palace became the residence of Crown Prince Christian and Princess Alexandrine. After the death of Christian X, the palace was placed at the disposal of Prince Knud, the heir presumptive. The palace was the home of Crown Prince Frederick until his marriage in 2004. Today, there is little left of the remaining Rococo interior. Much of the interior reflects the changing taste and style of its residents over the years. In the 1980s, the palace was restored as residence for the Crown Prince, storage facilities for the Queen's Reference Library, and an Amalienborg's museum for the Royal House of Glucksborg. The museum features private royal apartments from 1863 to 1947, including original fittings and furnishings. Tours are sometimes held of the rooms on the Piano Nobile and also include a chronological museum of the Danish kings. Frederick VIII's Palace, also known as Brockdorf's Palace, is the northeastern palace. It has been the home of Crown Prince Frederick and the Crown Princess Mary since their marriage. It was originally built for Count Joachim Brockdorff in the 1750s. Brockdorff died in 1763, and Lord High Steward Adam Gottlob Moltke acquired the palace. Then Moltke sold it 2 years later to King Frederick V. From 1767, it housed the Danish Military Academy, also known as the Army Cadet Academy. In 1788, naval cadets replaced the Army cadets until the academy moved to another location in 1827. The following year, the palace was prepared to house King Christian VIII's son, Frederick VII, who ascended the throne in 1848, and his bride, Princess Wilhelmine. Architect Jürgen Hansen Koch successfully and thoroughly refurbished the palace in French Empire style in 1827-28. After the marriage was dissolved in 1837, various members of the royal family lived in the palace. In 1869, it became the home of Frederick VIII. In 1934, it became the home of King Frederick IX and Queen Ingrid. The latter lived there until her death in 2000. From 2006 to 2010, the palace underwent major renovation to accommodate the Crown Prince couple. Christian IX's palace is the southeastern palace and is also known as Sheikh's Palace. It has been the home of Queen Margaret II since 1967. She resides there during autumn and winter. It was originally commissioned by Privy Councillor Severn Levenskiold, but in 1754, he had to give up due to economic difficulties. The project was taken over by Countess Anna Sophie Schack, née Rantzau and her step-grandson, Count Hans Schack. Lastly, a fire shortly after the change of ownership delayed completion by a couple of years. On 7th of January 1757, Hans Schack married Countess Ulrike Auguste Wilhelmine Moltke, daughter of Adam Gottlob Moltke, and as his son-in-law had use of the best artists and craftsmen to complete the interiors. In 1794, the palace was taken over from private residence by the Prince Regent, then Crown Prince Frederick, and his wife Crown Princess Marie. The palace was used from 1852 by the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on different occasions. It was later the home of Christian IX. Until his death in 1906, the home remained untouched afterwards until 1948. In 1967, the palace was restored for the successor to the throne, the then Crown Princess Margrethe and Prince Henrik. Now, write in the Google Maps Frederickskirche and walk towards Frederick's Church. Frederick's Church, popularly known as the Marble Church for its Rococo architecture, is an evangelical Lutheran church. The church was designed by the architect Nicolai, 880 to 1740, and was along with the rest of Frederiksstaden, a district of Copenhagen intended to commemorate the 300 years jubilee of the first coronation of a member of the House of Oldenburg. Frederick's Church has the largest church dome in Scandinavia with a span of 31 meters. The dome rests on 12 columns. The inspiration was probably St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The foundation stone was set by the King Frederick V on 31st of October 1749, but the construction was slowed by budget cuts and the death of ADD in 1754. In 1770, the original plans for the church were abandoned by Johann Friedrich Struensee. The church was left incomplete and, despite several initiatives to complete it, stood as a ruin for nearly 150 years. In 1874, Andreas Frederick Krieger, Denmark's finance minister at the time, sold the ruins of the uncompleted church and the church square to Carl Frederick Tietjen for 100,000 rigsdaler, none of which was to be paid in cash, on the condition that Tietjen would build a church in a style similar to the original plans and donate it to the state when complete, while in turn he acquired the rights to subdivide neighboring plots for development. The deal was at the time highly controversial. On 25th of January 1877, a case was brought by the Folketing at the Court of Impeachment, Krieger being charged with corruption over this deal. He was, however, eventually acquitted. Tietjen got Ferdinand Meldahl to design the church in its final form and financed its construction. Due to financial restrictions, the original plans for the church to be built almost entirely from marble were discarded, and instead Meldahl opted construction to be done with limestone. The church was finally opened to the public on 19th of August, 1894. Reinscribed in gold lettering on the entablature of the front portico are the words Herrens ord bliver evangelig, means in English, the word of the Lord endureth forever. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 25. Church has series of statues of prominent theologians and ecclesiastical figures, including one of the eminent Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, who incidentally had become very critical of the established church by the end of his life. Statues encircles the grounds of the building. Jesper Brookmand, Hans Stassen, Perdere Palladius, Thomas King, all done by Viggo Jarl, then Hans Egede and Hans Adolf Borsen done by August Saby, Ansgar by T.S. Stein, Nikolai Ettinger by Jordan Gudmundsson Holmgreen, Johan Nordal, Brunn by Gerard Willemsen, and Bernhard Severin Ingemann by Nud Mellemos. Now, right in the Google Maps, Boy with the Swan, and walk towards King's Garden. Rosenborg Castle Gardens may name the King's Garden. In Danish Kongens have as the oldest and most visited park in central Copenhagen, established in the early 17th century as the private gardens of King Christian IV's Rosenborg Castle. The park also contains several other historical buildings, including Rosenborg Barracks, as well as a high number of statues and monuments. The park also holds art exhibitions and other events such as concerts in the summer, as the park traces history back to 1606, when King Christian IV acquired land outside Copenhagen's East Rampart and established a pleasure garden in Renaissance style, which also delivered fruit, vegetables, and flowers for the royal household at Copenhagen Castle. The garden had a relatively small pavilion, which was later expanded into present-day Rosenborg Castle, which was completed in 1624. In 1634, Charles Augier, secretary to the French ambassador to Denmark, compared the gardens to the Tuileries Garden in Paris. A drawing by Otto Heider from 1649, the oldest dated garden plan from Denmark, provides knowledge about the layout of the original garden. The garden contained a pavilion, statues, a fountain, and various other features. Its plants included lavender, mulberries, wines, apples, and pears. In the century, as fashions changed, the garden was redesigned. A garden plan from 1669 show a garden maze, a typical feature of the Baroque garden. It had an intricate system of paths, which led to a central space with an octagonal summer house in its center. Actors from about 1710, after Frederiksberg Palace had been built. Rosenborg Castle, as well as its gardens, was largely abandoned by the royal family, and the gardens were instead open to the public. Johann Cornelius Krieger was appointed gardener of the orangery in 1711, and after becoming head gardener in 1721, he redesigned the garden in the Baroque style. The 12-hectare park is bounded by the Stridsgathersgade, Ostervoldgade, Salvgade, and Kronprinsessegade. Rosenborg Castle is in the northwestern section of the park and is surrounded by a moat on 3 sides. The 2 main entrances are the King's Gate at the corner of Gathersgade and Kronprinsessegade, and the Queen's Gate at the corner of Ostervoldgade in Salvgade. There are also 4 other entrances to the park. A dominant feature of the scenery are the 2 diagonal lime tree avenues, which intersect near the center of the park and are known as the Knight's Path and the Lady's Path, while the rest of the paths are laid out in a grid pattern. The tree-lined avenues were planted as part of Krieger's Baroque garden, but the underlying network of paths can be seen in Heider's plan from 1649. Social sections include the perennials garden in front of the wall along Salvgade and the Rose Garden. Rosenborg Castle is a Renaissance castle. The castle was originally built as a country summer house in 1606 and is an example of Christian IV's many architectural projects. It was built in the Dutch Renaissance style, typical of Danish buildings during this period, and has been expanded several times, finally evolving into its present condition by the year 1624. Tex Bertel Lange and Hans van Steenwinckel the Younger are associated with the structural planning of the castle. The castle was used by Danish regents as a royal residence until around 1710. After the reign of Frederick IV, Rosenborg was used as a royal residence only twice, and both these times were during emergencies. The first time was after Christiansborg Palace burned down in 1794, and the second time was during the British attack on Copenhagen in 1801. The Long Hall located on the 3rd floor was completed in 1624. It was originally intended as a ballroom. Around 1700, it was used as royal reception room and for banquets. It was not until the second half of the 19th century that it became known as the Knights' Hall. Christian V had the hall partly modernized with 12 tapestries depicting the king's victories in the Scanian War from 1675 to 1679. The stucco ceiling seen today is from the beginning of the 18th century. It shows the Danish coat of arms, surrounded by the orders of the Elephant and of Dannebrog. Side reliefs depict historical events from the first years of the reign of Frederick IV, including the liberation of the serfs, the founding of the dragoons, and of the land militia among them. The frescoes in the ceiling by Hendrik Krok represent the regalia. Among the main attractions of Rosenborg are the coronation chair of the absolutist kings and the throne of the queens with the 3 silver lions standing in front. The Long Hall also contains a large collection of silver furniture, of which most is from the 17th century. The castle is open to the public for tours and houses a museum exhibiting the royal collections. Artifacts spanning a breadth of royal Danish culture from the late 16th century of Christian IV to the 19th century. Some of these articles once belonged to the nobility and the aristocracy. The castle, now state property, was opened to the public in 1838. So interest to tourists is a treasury displaying the crown jewels and the Danish crown regalia located in the castle. A coronation carpet is also stored there. The throne chair of Denmark is in the castle. Rosenborg Barracks is located on the corner of Gothersgade and Ostervoldgade and was originally a pavilion and two long conservatory buildings built by Lamthaven for Christian V. In 1709, they were built together to form one large Oranger complex, and in 1743, it was redesigned into the Baroque style by Johann Cornelius Kiger. From 1885 to 1886, it was converted for use by the Royal Lifeguard by engineer officer Ernst Payman. In 1985, they moved to new premises at Fovelty between Allerød and Birkerød, and since then Rosenborg Barracks has only housed guards on duty at Copenhagen. The commandant's house is located just left of the main entrance to Rosenborg Castle and faces a lawn. It was built from 1760 to 1763 to designs by Jacob Fordeling. Today, the building plays host to special exhibitions. In fact, the Lifeguard guards the royal family, the Amalienborg Palaces, and the Rosenborg Castle. The Hercules Pavilion stands at the end of Cavallergangen and takes its name from a statue of Hercules positioned in a deep niche between two Tuscan columns. It is flanked by two smaller niches with statues of Orpheus and Eurydice. The three statues were made by the Italian sculptor Giovanni Baratta and acquired by Frederick IV during his visit to Italy. Along Kronprinsessegade and parts of Gothersgade. The park is enclosed by a wrought iron grille incorporating 16 small pavilions, which opens to the street side. After the Copenhagen Fire of 1795, there was an urgent need for new housing, and Crown Prince Frederik put the southern strip of his garden at disposal for the construction of a new street which was to connect Gothersgade to Southgate. It was named Kronprinsessegade, in English Crown Princess Street. In honor of Crown Princess Marie Sophie, new residential buildings soon sprung up along the south side of the street. But at the same time, the need arose for a barrier toward the garden, and city architect Peter Main was charged with the commission. He had just returned from Paris, where he had been struck by the Pont U with its iron grille and many small shops and the street life, which surrounded it. With this as an inspiration, he designed the new grille along the edge of the park with 14 small shop pavilions, which were completed in 1806. The two last pavilions opposite Landemarket were not built until 1920. Before this time, the site was occupied by two buildings, Exerzerhus and Rosenborg Brandenstal. The pavilions are built to a new classical design and are 6 Ls wide, 6 Ls deep, and 6 Ls high. The goods which were sold from the pavilions were cakes and stockings. Later, they were available to architects and artists from the Royal Arts Academy as a sort of grant. Today, they are rented out by the Palaces and Properties Agency on 2-year leases with possibility of extension. There is a required minimum opening time of 20 hours per week, and the use need be relevant to the site's history and at the same time put it in a contemporary context. The oldest sculpture in the garden is the Horse and Lion, commissioned by Christian IV from Peter Husum in 1617 and completed in 1625, a near copy of an antique marble sculpture at Capitoline Hill in Rome. It depicts a lion with a humanoid face which is tearing apart a horse, which it has just brought down. The subject is associated with a Persian legend about the battle between light and darkness. The statue was probably placed in the garden after its completion, but temporarily moved to Glekstad in 1643. In connection with Prince Friedrich III's marriage to Sophie Amalie of Brunswick-Luneburg in 1643, supposedly as an expression of the king's aggravation over his cousin George, Catherine Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg's failure to assist him in the Battle of Lutter in 1626 with the lion representing the coat of arms of Denmark and the horse that of the duchy. The statue was moved back to the garden at Rosenborg Castle when Frederick III ascended the throne and is now located between the two ring riding columns in the southern section of the park. The 17 marble balls surrounding the Matson lawn are believed to come from the never-completed St. Anne's Rotunda. A monumental church which was under construction on a nearby site but never completed and have been placed in the park since at least 1780. Boy and the Swan is a fountain consisting of a 148 centimeters tall bronze sculpture of a small boy riding on a swan which sprays water from its beak, resting on a granite plinth in the middle of a depressed basin. The bronze sculpture was created by each Friandin replaced a sandstone figure with the same motif, which was made by the French sculptor Leclerc and placed in the garden in 1738. The monument to Viggo Horp was designed by Jens Ferdinand Wilhelmsen and installed in 1907 at the initiative of the newspaper Politiken, which he had co-founded in 1884. The monument was blown up by the Germans in 1945, shortly before the end of World War II, but a new cast was made after the war. The head of the original statue is on display in the J.F. Wilhelmsen Museum. Here are various public arts that can be found inside the park. Echo sculpture by Axel Hansen in 1888. Statue of Dalbergier Queen Caroline Emilie by Wilhelm Bissen in 1896. Statue of Hans Christian Andersen by August Seaby in 1880. Act Group of Deer Sculpture by Arthur Ledoux in 1910. Original Moment of Peril Battle with a Snake Sculpture by Thomas Brock in 1880. Little Gunver Sculpture by Theobald Stein in 1899. Two Resting Lion Sculpture Artist Unknown and made in 1673. Statue of Jorg Brandes by Klinger and Happiness Sculptor by Robert Jacobson. A little break for 1 minute. So we get to the Fountain of Boy with the Swan. Now, right in the Google Maps Kongens Nytorv and walk towards King's New Square. Kongens Nytorv, meaning the King's New Square, is a public square centrally located at the end of the pedestrian street Stroget in Copenhagen. It's the largest square of the city. It was laid out by Christian V in 1670 in connection with a major extension of the fortified city and has an equestrian statue of him at its center. The initiative moved the center of the city from the medieval area around Gammeltorv, at that time a muddy medieval marketplace, to a cobbled new square with a garden complex inspired by the royal city planning seen in Paris from the early 17th century. In the beginning of the 17th century, the area later to become Kongens Nytorv was located outside the fortifications of Copenhagen as the eastern section of the ramparts. Ostervold ran along the western edge of the current square with the eastern city gate. Osterport, which is located at the end of the street Ostergate. Outside the gate, an undulating terrain extended towards the sea. As part of Christian IV's ambitious plans to strengthen Copenhagen as a regional center, he wanted to double the area of the fortified city. He acquired 200 hectares of land outside Osterport in 1606 to protect the new city district called New Copenhagen or St. Anne's Town. He started construction of a redoubt St. Anne's Post in Danish Sankt Anne Skanes. The site later to become named Kastellet. In the beginning of the 1640s, the old Ostervold was abandoned altogether in favor of the new ramparts further north, and the location of the King's New Square, Kongens Nytorv, was decided in 1647 with the construction of the street Gothersgade in 1647. Rectors. According to a master plan created by the fortification engineer Axel Europe's Kongens Nytorv was to be connected to the sea by a canal. At this time, under the reign of Frederick III, the site was a chaotic area, dominated by remains of the old ramparts and piles of garbage, almost made unpassable when wet weather transformed it into a muddy morass. Due to the topography and obstructed character of the premises, The site was popularly known as Hollandse a reference to the horse by the same name, which had to be traversed when traveling from Scania in Holland. Shortly after Christian V was crowned in 1670, he decided to level and cobble the square. This decision was taken mainly for military reasons. Its strategic location, with almost the same distance to all points along the ramparts of the city, making it well suited as a central alarm square. At the same time, the square was to serve as a place royale with inspirations from France. And around the new square was distributed among interested wealthy citizens, including people from the new ranks. Buildings facing the square were required to be in at least 2 stories and meet certain standards. Alec Roderick Gildenlove, Christian V's half-brother, completed his Geldenlove mansion on the square in the mid-1780s. Admiral Henrik Wegelke constructed another town mansion on the square in the 1670s. It was in 1721 acquired by Ulrich Adolf von Holstein and was from then on known as the Holstein Mansion. The Jewel Mansion was completed for the naval officer Niels Jewel in 1683. Carl Christian von Gramm was also the owner of a town mansion of the square. In 1688, a Baroque garden complex with trees around a parterre and a gilded equestrian statue of Christian V in its center was inaugurated. In 1747, the entire square was rebuilt by Frederick V as a military drill and ceremony ground for the king's troops until 1908, where the square was reshaped into its original design. The equestrian statue of Christian V was created by the French sculptor Abraham César Le Moreau. Dating from 1688, it is the oldest equestrian statue in Scandinavia. Originally made in gilded lead, it was recast in bronze in 1939. So, the direct inspiration from the equestrian statue of Louis XIII erected at the center of Place des Vosges in Paris in 1630. It depicts the king dressed like a Roman imperator with a laurel-wreathed helmet. At the foot of the plinth, Le Moreau placed 4 allegorical statues. Facing Charlotte Domburg Palace stand figures of Minerva and Alexander the Great representing prudence and fortitude, while the opposite side features statues of Hercules and Artemisa, personifications of strength and honor. Even though Le Meurtrier depicted the horse in a trout-like gait, with inspiration from Marcus Aurelius' course at the Capitoline Hill, the design caused severe problems due to the soft metal used for the casting. That led to the construction, therefore had to be strengthened, and Le Meurtrier introduced a figure of a naked man crouched underneath the horse hoof, personifying envy, but in the same time affording support for the horse's barrel as the weakest point of the statue. However, over the centuries, the problems with the statue continued, particularly with the horse's front left leg, and finally, Professor Anna Rutson Frank from the Danish Academy of Fine Arts was commissioned to recast the statue in bronze. This happened from 1939 to 1942, and the new cast was inaugurated on 22nd of May 1946. Kransen is an old form of the Danish word krans, meaning circle or wreath. It is an elliptical parterre surrounding the statue of Christian V. The ellipse was a favored geometrical shape at the time, an obvious example being the elliptical pattern in the paving around the Marcus Aurelius statue at Piazza del Campidoglio. Area for parterre, 2 rows of trees were planted. In 1711, the garden complex was remodeled. Before it was given up in 1747, the garden was removed to make room for military drills, with some of the trees being dug altogether up, leaving only the equestrian statue. Some of the trees were dug up and reused for the establishment of the Avenue Austerlitz. New rows of elm trees were planted around the statue in 1855-56, but by 1998 they were dying from Dutch elm disease and removed. In 2001, 80 lime trees were planted as part of a major refurbishment of the square. On the square stands an old kiosk and telephone stand from 1913. It is built in Baroque Revival style with a copper-clad roof and hand-carved ornamentation. It also used to offer the first public telephonic connection in Copenhagen, from where it was possible to call every day except Sunday from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Today, it houses a small cafe with outdoor service. Bay Hersdorf House No. 3 to 5 was built in 1780 to design by Caspar Friedrich Hersdorf. The building's facade was to serve as a model for the many master builders of the time who had little or no academic training. The Royal Danish Theatre's current building, No. 1, is from 1872 to 1874 and was designed by Wilhelm de Hillerød. Its Art Nouveau style 1931 extension Sterekassen, which spans the street toward Den Stolzgade, was built both as an extension of the theater and a new home for Denmark's radio. The Thought Mansion No. 4 is from 1683 and is now home to the French Embassy. Number 8 was built for A.P. Møller-Mærsk Group in numbers 9 to 10, and the shipping company was headquartered in the building until 1979. Jyllands-Postens Copenhagen office was then based in the building until 2010. So the Limehouse number 18 is from 1787. Number 26 was built for the Great Northern Telegraph Company in 1898. The company was headquartered in the building until 2008. The building is from 1767. Hotel d'Angleterre number 34 is one of the oldest and most prestigious hotels in Copenhagen. The current building is from 1874. Magazine du Nord number 13, a leading department, opened in 1893-94. Hvidtvinstuen number 19 is the oldest tavern in Copenhagen. The New King Square is frequently used as an open-air exhibition venue, especially for photo exhibitions. In winter, a 2,200 square meter or 23,681 square feet circular ice skating rink is constructed around Crinsen. Skating is free of charge and ice skate rental is available. As an old tradition, graduating high school students from the Copenhagen area, when they graduate in June, they come to King's New Square in buses, trucks, or horse wagons to dance and run around Crinsen, throwing their graduation caps into the air, celebrating their graduation. Mindshuri, the northern side of Nyhavn, is lined by brightly colored townhouses built with wood, bricks, and plaster. The oldest house at number 9 dates from 1681. The colorful houses are pictured as landmark of the Copenhagen city. Between 1845 and 1864, Hans Christian Andersen lived at number 67, where a memorial plaque now stands. From 1871 to 1875, Andersen lived at Nyhavn number 18, which currently houses an Andersendom souvenir shop. Like the southern side of Nyhavn, has lavish mansions lining the canal. Now, write in the Google Maps Kongelige Theater and walk towards the Royal Danish Theater. The Royal Danish Theater is both the National Danish Performing Arts Institution and a name used to refer to its old purpose-built venue from 1870. For located on King's New Square in Copenhagen. The theater was founded in 1748, first serving as the Theater of the King and then as the Theater of the Country. The theater presents opera, the Royal Danish Ballet, multi-genre concerts, and drama in several locations. The Royal Danish Theatre Organization is under the control of the Danish Ministry of Culture. The Old Stage is the original Royal Danish Theatre, built in 1874. The Copenhagen Opera House was built in 2004, Sterkæsien. The new stage is an Art Deco theater adjacent to the main theater. It was used for drama productions. It is no longer used by the actual Royal Theatre. The Royal Danish Playhouse is a venue for spoken theater with 3 stages. Inaugurated in 2008, theater has a monument for Ludvig Holberg and a poet, Adam Oklensklager, standing in front of the building towards the King's New Square. Kunsthal Charlottenborg is an exhibition building in Copenhagen, Denmark. It is the official exhibition gallery of the Royal Danish Academy of Art. Charlottenborg Palace was constructed in 1670-83 as a residence for Ulrik Frederik Gildenlove. It was constructed in the Baroque architectural idiom shared by Holland, England, and Denmark. Dowager Queen Charlotte Amalie bought the palace in 1700, and her name has remained with it ever since. In 1787, the ownership of the palace was transferred to the Royal Danish Academy of Art and is called Modern Art Break Palace. The Cours de Logis was rebuilt facing the King's New Square in 1827 under design by architect Christian Frederik Hansen and contains the Academy's Festal and Antikcellen. Kunsthal Charlottenborg has become famous for its Charlottenborg Spring Exhibition, to which anyone may submit work, which is vetted by a jury before a selection is shown, but the fall exhibition after our Sudstilling is by invitation. Now, write in the Google Maps Holmens Kirke and walk towards the Holmen Church. The Holmen Church in Danish, Holmenskirke, is a parish church on the street called Holmenskanal. First built as an anchor forge in 1563, it was converted into a naval church by Christian IV. It is famous for having hosted the wedding between Margrethe II of Denmark, current Queen of Denmark, and Prince Henrik in 1967. It is the burial site of such notabilities as naval heroes Niels Dram and Peter Tordenskiold and composer Nilly Wallandade. The appearance of Holmen Church today closely resembles that of the renovation in 1872, except for the color. The windows are in clear glass and predominantly set in iron. The spire is dressed in copper, just like small spire on the confessional's roof. The church's Lutheran denomination. The church's pipe organ was originally made by Lambert Adolf Hastings and installed in 1738, and the facade remains in place today. The actual organ, however, is from 1956. The current pulpit was installed in 1662 and was carved by Abel Schroeder and stands in the natural color of its oak, except for the king and queen's monograms and crowns, which are gilded. It is the oldest preserved pulpit in Copenhagen and the most richly decorated. It stands from floor to ceiling and depicts Christian history, from Moses holding the basket up to Jesus Christ. The oldest baptismal font in the church is in wrought iron and stands 117 centimeters or 46 inches tall. A white marble font was installed in 1756, created by Carl Frederick Stanley in Classicist style, but is no longer in the church. The new baptismal font from 1872 was made by the Sculptevens by Ludwig van Geekfinger's design in black marble and sandstone. There is a model of Niels Juel's ship Christianus Quintus, hangs from the ceiling in the church. In medieval Copenhagen, Holmen was an actual island. However, in the 16th century, city restructuring made it less of an island and more of a peninsula surrounded by Holmen's Canal. On this peninsula, Christian III of Denmark founded a shipyard which became synonymous with the name Holmen. In 1562-63, Frederick II of Denmark built an anchor forge for Holmen, which was placed on the other side of the canal. The building was atypically shaped, as special consideration was given not to spoil the view from the king's castle, Christiansborg. The actual forge was hidden behind a taller building, called the Tower, which was given a handsome front in Italian style facing the castle, and which was erected by Peter de Dunkers. In 1617, Christian IV of Denmark has built houses for the Navy's personnel between the Church of St. Nicolaj and Holmen. This created an influx in population, which made it necessary to build a larger church, which the king had set up in the former anchor forge. At first, the reconstruction into a church caused no redesign of the building's blueprints. The church was consecrated on 5th of September 1619, but craftsmen were still working on the church during 1620. The building had certain similarities to a village church, with the higher tower as a bell tower in one end, but the tower was not an actual part of the church, and the bells were situated in the opposite end of the building. So the church quickly became too small, and already in 1641, it was decided to expand it into a cruciform church. The tower was incorporated into the church, and the remainder of the church was brought to the same height. The two new arms are slightly shorter than the two old ones. Leonhard Blasius was the builder of the church, but indications are that the king decided on the layout of the church modeled after the Glucksburg Castle Church. And the walls are tile on a high foundation of granite blocks. The new arms were built in yellow bricks, which are smaller than the stone used in the tower, for the building to have a uniform look. The walls were painted in yellow and red vertical stripes, on which white lines were painted in order to resemble a brick wall. The spire was built in 2 stories with the bells in the bottom half. This spire has caused significant problems over the years, as the wooden construction of the roof was not strong enough to carry the weight. The construction was reinforced in 1698 and in 1793, but not until 1930 was the collapse halted by the introduction of an iron construction. It is estimated that the spire sits 60 or 2 feet lower than when it was first built. The major Copenhagen fires of 1728 and 1795 did not affect the Holmen Church, and the bombardments in 1659 and 1807 only caused minor damage to the church, and thus the fundamental shape of the church today is the same as when it was first constructed. However, a cannonball is visible in the plinth on the northern side of the quay, supposedly from the Swedish assault in 1658. In 1697, a chapel was built for Niels Juel in the church designed by Ernst Brandenburger. This building was later removed after the construction of Niels Juel's mausoleum. When Roskilde Cathedral was renovated, Christian IV of Denmark's portal from 1635 was transferred to the eastern gable of the Holmen Church. The sculpting and stucco were repaired early in the 20th century, as had become necessary due to the sinking of spire construction. In preparation for the wedding between hereditary Prairie Princess Margrethe and Prince Henrik in 1967, which took place in the church underwent major restoration. This included changing the wooden floor to stone. Now, write in the Google Maps Marmron and walk towards the Christiansborg Castle. Christiansborg Palace is a palace and government building on the islet of Slotsholmen. It is the seat of the Danish Parliament and Danish Folketinget, the Danish Prime Minister's office, and the Supreme Court of Denmark. The palace is home to the three supreme powers: the executive power, the legislative power, and the judicial power. It is the only building in the world that houses all three of a country's branches of government. The present building, the third with this name, is the last in a series of successive castles and palaces constructed on the same site. From 1849, the palace has housed the seat of parliament. Thus, the palace today bears witness to three eras of Danish architecture as the result of two serious fires. Christiansborg Palace is owned by the Danish government. The first castle on the site was Absalon's Castle. According to the Danish chronicler Saxe Grammaticus, Bishop Absalon of Roskilde built a castle in 1167 on a small island outside Copenhagen harbor. Out at the death of Absalon in 1201, possession of the castle and city of Copenhagen passed to the bishops of Roskilde. A few decades later, however, a bitter feud erupted between crown and church, and for almost 2 centuries the ownership of the castle and city was contested between kings and bishops. In 1370, King Valdemar IV of Denmark was defeated in a conflict with the Hanseatic League. They sent 40 stonemasons to demolish the castle. The castle had long been a terrible nuisance to the Hanseatic cities trade, and the time had now come to remove it. Like during the years after the demolition of Bishop Absalon's castle by the Hanse League in 1369. The ruins on the island were covered with earthworks on which a new stronghold, Copenhagen Castle, was built. This was completed in the late 14th century. The castle was still the property of the Bishop of Roskilde until King Eric VII usurped rights to the castle in 1417. In the middle of the 15th century, the castle became the principal residence of the Danish kings and the center of government. The castle was rebuilt several times. In the 1720s, Frederick IV entirely rebuilt the castle, but it became so heavy that the walls began to give way. It became therefore evident to Christian IV, Frederick IV's successor, immediately after his accession to the throne in 1730, that an entirely new castle had to be built. The demolition of the Copenhagen Castle was in 1731 to make room for the first Christiansborg. The ruins of Absalon's Castle and Copenhagen Castle were excavated at the start of the 20th century and can be seen today in excavations under the present palace. The ruins beneath the palace square were excavated in 1917, and a cover was also built over them. The ruins have been open to the public since 1924. The ruins exhibition was renovated during the period 1974-77, and it has remained untouched since then. King Christian IV commissioned architect Elias David Husser to build the first Christiansborg Palace. And in 1733, work started on a Baroque palace. The palace included showgrounds and chapel and was the largest palace in Northern Europe at the time. Palace and church were ruined by a fire in 1794, but the showgrounds were saved. While the royal family lived in temporary accommodations at Amalienborg Palace, architect Christian Frederick Hansing started building the second Christiansborg in 1803 in a French Empire style. By the time the palace was finished in 1828, but King Frederick VII was the only monarch to live in the palace. This was between 1852 and 1863. After the introduction of the constitutional monarchy with the Constitution of 1849, the south wing of the palace became the meeting place of the two houses of the first Danish parliament in Danish, the Rigsdagen. The second Christiansborg burned down in 1884. The showgrounds, including the riding school, court theater, and Hansen's chapel, were saved. The ruins remained in place for the following 23 years due. Thorvald Jorgensen designed the third and current Christiansborg, which was built from 1907 to 1928. The palace was to contain premises for the royal family, the legislature, and the judiciary, and was built in neo-Baroque style in reinforced concrete with granite-covered facades. The palace is roughly divided in the middle, with the parliament located in the southern wing, and the royal reception rooms, the Supreme Court, and the Prime Minister's office in the northern wing. The palace is partly open to the public with guided tours for a substantial fee. The royal reception rooms at Christiansborg Palace are located on the ground floor and first floor in the northern half of the palace. The rooms are used for official functions of the monarch, such as banquets, state dinners, the New Year's leave, diplomatic accreditations, audiences, and meetings of the Council of State. Facing the palace square is the Oval Throne Room, where foreign ambassadors present their credentials to Queen Margrethe II. The throne room gives access to the balcony where the Danish monarchs are proclaimed. The throne room is decorated with a large ceiling painting by Christian Iversen depicting how the Danish flag Dannebrog fell from the sky in Estonia in 1219. The royal reception rooms also include the Fredensborg Hall, with Laurits Tuxen's painting of King Christian IX and his whole family together at Fredensborg Palace, and parts of the Queen's Library. The Great Hall is the largest and most spectacular of the royal reception rooms. The hall is 40 meters long with a ceiling height of 10 meters, and a gallery runs all the way around the room. The hall seats 400 guests and is used for banquets, state dinners, and receptions. The Alexander Hall is named for Berteltath Thorvaldsen's marble frieze, Alexander the Great Enters Babylon. The frieze was made for the Second Christiansborg Palace, and parts of it survived the fire. It was later restored and mounted in this room. The first floor of the Parliament wing is structured around the lobby. At both ends of lobby are the chambers of Riksdagen, the former bicameral parliament. The Folketing chamber is located at the far end and the Landsting located at the other. The far chamber has been the only one in use since the Folketing became the sole legislative assembly in 1953. Christiansborg Palace Chapel is a part of the palace, which is at the disposal and in use for religious ceremonies for members of the Danish royal family. It is also used by the Danish parliament for the church service in connection with the opening of parliament. The history of Christiansborg Palace Chapel goes back to the first Christiansborg Palace, which was built by the contractor general Elias David Hauser from 1733 to 1745. Night King. Christian, fourth commissioned a talented architect in the King's Building Service. Nikolai Eittekov to design the palace chapel 1738-42. In 1794, fire ravaged the palace, and it was decided to demolish the ruins completely. The demolition, however, never took place. Architect Christian Frederick Hansey, who resurrected the palace between 1803 and 1828, was also commissioned to rebuild the palace chapel in 1810. Work commenced in 1813 using the existing foundations and masonry as far as possible. The church and main palace were built in strict neoclassical style, with a dome construction on top of a central church interior. The palace chapel was inaugurated on 14th of May 1826 to mark the 1000th anniversary of the introduction of Christianity to Denmark. But the second palace fire in 1884 spared the church as the fire was stopped in the buildings linking it to the palace. However, fate finally caught up with the church on 7th of June 1992. The church burned to the ground. Shortly afterwards, the Danish Ministry of Finances, Palaces, and Properties Agency began rebuilding the chapel. Historically accurate building methods were also used throughout the rebuilding process. Sure, the rebuilt church was inaugurated on 14th of January 1997 to celebrate Queen Margrethe II's Silver Jubilee. Her showgrounds are now all that remain of the first Christiansborg Palace. They consist of two symmetrical wings with a straight, low and narrow stable building, followed by a high broad building and narrow, curved stables, after which a one-story narrow end building closes off the wings at the Frederiksholm Canal end. In 1742, the north wing became the first one to be finished. Building work on the south wing started in June 1740, but ground to a halt by the autumn. Work did not recommence until January 1744, now under the supervision of the architect Nikolai Eitberg, GTV. Eitberg's superior artistic insight meant it turned out more beautiful than the north wing. The royal stables are home to the horses and carriages used to perform the ceremonial transport for the Danish royal family during state events and festive occasions. Today, there are about 20 horses left. The interior is unchanged since the construction in the 1740s. Since 1922, the Court Theatre has housed the collection of the Theatre Museum, located on the floor above the big stables. The auditorium is often used for theatre performances, lectures, and television programs. You're already at the Copenhagen Castle. One of the wings was fitted out as a theatre. However, the first Christiansborg Palace was without a theatre. The theatre was designed by the French architect Nicolas Henry Jardin. Little remains of this original theatre as it was reconstructed in 1842, following the designs of architect Jørgen Hansen Koch. In 1881, the theater was closed as performance venue following the tragic fire of the Ring Theater in Vienna, which underlined the dangers involved in the continued use of old theaters. Now write in the Google Maps Copenhagen City Hall and head towards the Rådhus. Continuing more on Christiansborg, in June 2014, a viewing platform in the tower, still the tallest in the city, was made accessible to the public while the interior of the tower was refurbished, and a restaurant opened in place of what was once a storage room. Access to the viewing platforms free. In Hars's original project from the first Christiansborg, the two wings of the palace were linked by a gatehouse at the Frederiksholm Canal end, and a drawbridge led over the canal. The Palace Building Mission was not completely satisfied with their proposal and asked two young architects working for the Royal Building Authority, Nicolai Adeltied and Lauritz de Thurah, to come up with an alternative suggestion. Their proposal included a permanent bridge over Frederiksholm Canal, forming the main entrance to the palace and two portal pavilions flanking an open drive and closing the complex off between the two wings. Both bridge and pavilions were in the new Rococo style. Our responsibility was transferred to Adeltied, who was the prime mover behind the project. The bridge was extremely elegant, sandstone covered with medallion decorations by the sculptor Louis Auguste Leclerc. The pavements were paved with Norwegian marble, hence the name the Marble Bridge, and the roadway paved with cobblestones, thus the bridge, and pavilions were finished in 1744. In 1996, when Copenhagen was European Capital of Culture, the Palaces and Properties Agency finished a restoration of the showgrounds that had taken many years. The Marble Bridge and pavilions were restored between 1978 and 1996 by architect Eric Hansen, and the showgrounds from 1985-1996 by Royal Inspector of Listed State Buildings Gert T. Borneschi. A collection was started for the construction of a monument to King Christian IX shortly after his death in 1906. The following year, 4 artists were invited to compete for the commission. There was no discussion about the position of the statue. For it would be erected on Christiansborg riding ground complex as a pendant to the statue of King Frederick VII on the Palace Square. Sculptor Anne-Marie Carl Nielsen, the wife of composer Carl Nielsen, won the competition with her proposal for a new equestrian statue. In the proposal, the statue was shown on a high pedestal, on the sides of which were relief depicting a procession of the leading men of the day, including industrialist Carl Frederick Tietgen, politician Jacob Branham, Scavenius Estrup, and poets Jens Peter Jacobsen and Holger Drachmann. Reliefs were later axed, and the architect Andreas Clemenses designed the pedestal that bears the horse today. The sculptor sought throughout the country for the right horse to stand as a model, but found it in Hanover in Germany. This gave rise to a good deal of displeasure among Danish horse breeders. The monument took a long time to complete. But in 1927, 21 years after the king's death, it was unveiled on the riding ground complex. Statues found in Christiansborg, statue of Christian IV by Hans Pauli Olsen, Sorna Abbey Kirkegård by Lua Hasselere, Peter Griffenfeld by Carl Martin Hansen, Christian Knight's equestrian statue, Mermaid statue by Anne-Marie Carl Nielsen. In Slotsholmen, the island, you can find the Christian IV's Old Stock Exchange Hall called Boren, the Christian IV's Brewery Thorvaldsen Museum, Danish Jewish Museum, the Royal Library, and War Museum. Now write in the Google Maps Copenhagen City Hall and head towards the Ratus. Copenhagen City Hall in Danish Copenhagen's Radhuset is the headquarters of the Copenhagen City Council, as well as the Lord Mayor's office. The current building was designed by the architect Martin Nyrop in the National Romantic style. The design of the City Hall was greatly inspired by the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena, Italy, and the design of the square was accordingly modeled on the shell-shaped Piazza del Campo outside that building. Their construction began in 1892, and the hall was opened on 12th of September 1905. It is dominated by its richly ornamented front, the gilded statue of Absalon just above the balcony, and the tall, slim clock tower. The latter is at 105.6 meters, one of the tallest buildings in a generally low city of Copenhagen. In addition to the tower clock, the City Hall also houses Jens Olsen's World Clock. Before the City Hall moved to its present location, it was situated at Gammeltorp. The first City Hall was in use from about 1479 until it burned down in the Great Copenhagen Fire of 1728. The second City Hall was built in 1728 and was designed by G. Ernst G. Seekrager. It burned down in the Copenhagen Fire of 1795. In 1815, a new City Hall, designed by C.F. Hansen, was erected on New Torvet. It was intended to house both the City Hall and a court. Today, it is still in use as the Copenhagen Courthouse. City Hall Square is a public square in the center of Copenhagen. Its large size, central location, and affiliation with the City Hall makes it a popular venue for a variety of events, celebrations, and demonstrations. The square's central area is 9,800 square meters, and several bars and nightclubs are located in the vicinity. City Hall Square is located at the southwestern end of the pedestrian street Stroget. It is located at the site of Copenhagen's old Haymarket and the western city gate of the fortifications of Copenhagen. When the fortifications were disbanded in the 1850s, it was decided to use the vacant land for an exhibition area which played host to first the Nordic Exhibition of 1872 and later the Nordic Exhibition of 1888. Van Klein designed an exhibition building for the first exhibition, which was built at the corner of Vesterbro Passage, which was built from 1870 to 1872. The four-winged two-story building was built in red brick to a design which was inspired by Italian Renaissance architecture. In 1870, the center of the complex was rebuilt into a large domed exhibition hall. In the 1880s, plans were conceived to build a new city hall on the grounds, and in 1888, the expo area was cleared. On 28th of July, 1894, the foundation stone was laid. When it was inaugurated in 1905, the square was redesigned in 1995 and 1996 by K. Char Architects. On the occasion of Copenhagen being the European capital of culture, Busshub was built on the northern side of the square. In 2010, work began on a metro station on the site, requiring a major reorganization of the site. When it was opened on 29th of September 2019, sculptures found in the square. The Dragon Fountain, depicting a bull and a dragon in combat, designed by Thorvald Biendisbøl and Joachim Skavgaard, was inaugurated in 1904. The Weather Girl is perched high on the Ritz building on the corner of Radhuspladsen in Vesterbrogade. It is a gilded sculpture group telling the weather. One sculpture rotates to the front, depicting the girl with her bicycle, when the weather is set for rain. Another sculpture rotates to the front, depicting her with an umbrella walking her dog. The sculpture group is from 1936 and designed by Anne R. Frank. The Lure Blowers is a bronze, depicting two Lure blowers standing atop a column on tiles. Standing 20 m tall, it was created in 1911 to 1913 by Siegfried Wagner. Also, a statue of Hans Christian Andersen is in the square. From here, you can visit the Copenhagen's Tivoli or go to Copenhagen Central Railway Station. Left, you can find cafes and shops and more Copenhagen sightseeings. And if you found places to visit in Copenhagen, write in the comment section more information so everyone can benefit from them. Or click and like the video, and as the walking tours in the Copenhagen donate to the PayPal. You can rate it like 1 to 10 from 1 to 10 euros or dollars. The PayPal is down below, but do watch out for scammers in the comment section. Thank you for watching this video.